you very much. Let me say to the panel that I'm delighted that you're here, and you've been very informative with your testimony and your written testimony, as well as the articles and commissions and various statements that you've made in terms of reforming the intelligence community. And this is a totally serious question. It may sound like I'm being sarcastic, but I'm really not. I know that Congressman Hamilton's mentioned 35 years of work, and all of you have put in a decade of suggesting reforms. Can you tell me, do you have any idea why we can't reform the Intelligence Committee? I mean, is what we're doing here today and what we've been doing the past few months, is this going to be helpful, in your opinion, to reform the intelligence community? And I'm not advocating one of your suggestions or plan over another one. I think they all have some merit, and you probably could pick and choose items out of each one that would be beneficial. But what's the reason we can't fix it? We can't change it. We can't reorganize it.
Mr. Condit, I think, first of all, substantively, it's just very difficult. You've got a vast enterprise. You have thousands and thousands of workers. You have dozens and dozens of agencies. And it's terribly difficult to develop a consensus on how you put these boxes together and to whom you give authority and take away authority. It is one thing to be in favor of reform, but it's quite another thing to agree on how you reform. And we've never been able to build a consensus because substantively people have very different opinions. Secondly, the politics of it are very tough. Follows a little bit from the first point. But you begin to take away budget authority from the Defense Department anywhere, and you run into formidable resistance. And I just pick on the Defense Department, which may not be fair, but it's probably true elsewhere as well. And you move boxes around, you're shaking up careers and changing pensions and health care systems and all the rest. It becomes very, very difficult. So I'd say we can't reform. We haven't succeeded at reform because substantively we have not been able to get an agreement on a plan. You've heard the differences of opinion expressed in this panel.
And I appreciate that.
And then secondly, it's very difficult to do because of the politics of it.
Well, whose responsibility is it to knock heads if we have to? I mean, you're talking about bureaucracies, you're talking about turf battles, you're talking about, but is it our responsibility, the Congress?
I think the only way you really get major change in the organization of the federal government is from the president. The presidents really have to take the lead, otherwise you just can't get it done. The country was floundering around on Department of Homeland Security. All kinds of opinions out there. The president comes in and says, we're going to do it this way. That focuses everybody's attention. And he's the only person that can really move the bureaucracy in something of this sort. For presidents, this would not be an easy decision. I mean, it's a very, very difficult call for a president. Why did the president leave out of the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and the CIA? Well, I personally think his judgment was correct about that. But if, as a logical matter, as a rational matter, you'd put them all in the Department of Homeland Security, probably.
General, you want to make a comment?
I think the way to address that problem best is to ask who the users are. Intelligence is to be used. And if the users are happy with what's being supplied to them, then the organization's okay. If they're not happy, then they're the people who ought to try to change it. And I think that drives you back to Mr. Hamilton's point that the president, it has to start here. I've thought about this a lot. It seems to me the real constituency at the national level for intelligence is the president, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State. They want to change it. they can do it. They could do the changes that I'm talking about, except for a national counterintelligence system with an executive order. The big users, the really big users of intelligence, are the military services, and you don't even have that in your budget here. And if you take sort of off-the-wall proposals like I've heard the Scowcroft proposal have, where you would move the signals intelligence and the imagery out of the Defense Department, you know exactly what will happen. They will build their own there because when they're outside, they will not serve the Defense Department. I've had many experiences of calling up CIA and trying to get technical support. They work for the President. They don't work for the Defense Department. I don't think you'd want to outsource your plans writer if you were a military officer trying to run an operation. I don't think you'd want to outsource a lot of activities in that regard. If you're going to put everything outside of these departments under some other umbrella, then I think you've got a real problem of solving the support to the users. As long as the users are happy with this, it's going to continue just like it is. Therefore, I agree with Congressman Hamilton. I would say that I think you have an opportunity now to do something about the counterintelligence problem, which you haven't had before because the politics have just been impossible. I think you probably can do that piece. That's why I chose that. I think the DCI could, on his own, separate these two positions and begin to act more like and use the program authority. I don't know whether we're talking on the same sheet of music or not with Mr. Hamilton here on controlling the budget, but there is a lot more power in the control of the program than maybe you understand unless you've been through it. Once it's programmed in here, we can't move it out of the law the way you allocate it without coming back for reprogramming, et cetera. And if the DCI staff really exercises effective control over that, you'll have a lot of say. It has never done that effectively. One of the major reasons it hasn't done that effectively is this other structural issue, and that's the NRO arrangement, how it gets its money. And that's why I chose those three things. If you want to have a major effect on opening up for more better performance, it is the counterintelligence issue, first of all, and second, I think it is the DCI really becoming head of the community, and third, it is creating this national program management system.
Moving along, and I appreciate that. I get it that you think there's some organizational changes that can be made without the President of the Congress acting. But I would think that we have to take some role in this. We can't sit here and point our fingers at the bureaucracy and say they ought to do this and they ought to do that without us. Would you agree to that?
I agree with that. I should have added the constituency that I think can change it includes not just the President, Secretary of State, and the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State, who's a very important user, but also the chairman of the committees here. And it will be the chairman not only of the intelligence committees, but it will be of the armed services committees. And probably in the case of counterintelligence, the Judiciary Committee has oversight over the FBI.
Let me just think out of the box for a minute on Mr. Hamilton's suggestion on the DCI being the, I guess, the overall authority for intelligence at the White House. Is that right, Mr. Hamilton? And what Senator Rockefeller said about law enforcement, local agencies, how do you tie all those together? I mean, there are some countries who have centralized police, federal police. Are we talking that? I mean, because the problem is we have a communication problems with local law enforcement, the first responders, so on and so forth. Is that where we're headed? Well, we have.
May I try to answer that question? If you're talking, are we headed toward a federal police? I'd say absolutely not. I think if there's anything that's fundamental in this country is that we do not want a federal police system, and that's why we have the checks and balances that are there. We have to build up a more effective means of communicating between federal authorities and state and local in the times that we're going through. And, and rather than spending a lot of time on moving the boxes around, I would recommend that this committee and the Congress look to see those areas in the system which need badly to be shored up with appropriate resources and training. And I'll give you one example because I think it's crucial. There's a lot of talk about sharing of information, a lot of talk about gathering it and getting it to the right place in a timely way. And we've heard I've been reading the reports of witnesses who said where the failures have occurred. One place where the FBI has been trying to get help for years and has not succeeded is in its information structure, its information automatic case system. It's gone from one extreme to the other. It has enormous amounts of data coming in. Woefully inadequate means of mining that information and other shortfalls in communicating it out to people who need to know it. That's a 12-year-old system. I don't know a single successful business in this country that gets along on a 12-year-old system. They can only ask it limited numbers of questions. They can't do like I used to do as a navigator in World War II and the Korean War. I wanted as many fixes, lines to narrow the focus and get the information, not to ask it a question like, what is Alaska, and get a room full of information, and that's all I can ask. It really needs attention. The trilogy, the three patchwork system on which a lot of money's been spent, is not adequate to the task ahead. If we're going to bring everybody into this picture, we need to know who needs it, who doesn't need it, what is it that we're trying to find, and what do we have, and to move it along, and to share that with the Central Intelligence Agency and vice versa. DCI's whole purpose of gathering each other much further along the line and knowing how to do this. They have the filing systems, the retrieval systems, and the dissemination system that the FBI simply does not have and badly, badly needs. And if I just had that one impose on you to make that suggestion, look closely at the FBI's system for managing data, because it's worthless if it cannot reach the right people at the right time. And that's the kind of improvements that I think you can do. It used to be there was some cynical thing that the people in Congress would tell their constituents they added 1,000 new agents, and I was saying I'd rather, why not a new computer? And they said there's not a lot of political value in a new computer. But we have to put aside those, as I know this committee is doing, and see what's really needed. Make sure that the FBI is fully equipped. Not worry about how many more people, but worry about, do they have the ability to match up in an appropriate way with the Central Intelligence Agency and the Intelligence Committee, the community. Because that's what everyone's complaining about. Things went unnoticed or undetected or uncommunicated. And if you can help us in that area, it'll be a major step down the road, far better than
Judge Webster, you lead me in, and Mr. Hitz, I'll get back to you, but he leads me into an area that I just want to touch on briefly, and it's a little different than what we've talked about this morning. And one of the principal findings, I think, of the joint inquiry so far has that we've come up with is we've done a very poor job in sharing information within the intelligence community and between agencies and government that plays a role in combating terrorism. It's been pointed out, and you just did, that the new information technology can be very helpful in us linking these groups together and sharing of information. The concern I have is the technology can also be used vastly, to improve our way of communicating with each other. But what about people's privacy and civil liberties? What suggestions do you have to how the government can proceed to take advantage of these tremendous capabilities without infringing upon people's privacies and civil liberties? Okay, you have any suggestions for me with that, Judge Webster and Mr. Hitz as well?
I'm certainly not minimizing privacy. I think my own shorthand quick solution, I know that time is running, the judiciary plays a major role here and should in the future continue to do so. The fact that you have the ability to do something doesn't mean you should be allowed to do it unless there is probable cause and meets our legal standards for doing so, getting the appropriate warrants. Even the problem we have now with electronic surveillance, with digital privacy making it so difficult to do, you still need that warrant. But you also need help in making it possible. You get the warrant, and if you can't use it, it's not much good to you. There's improvement that needs to be brought along the road. When Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, 2,000 Americans were arrested, the entire cast of My American Cousin. That's the way things were in those days. They didn't have fingerprints. They didn't have DNA. They didn't have other forensic capabilities. And they certainly didn't have wiretapping. But the concept is, with the emerging standards of decency to which you refer in our society, we just have to get better professionally. But I think the Congress's role is to be sure that we have the tools and that we're using them in accordance with the law. And that's an important role for the Department of Justice, and that's why I'd hate to see law enforcement go outside the Department of Justice at the federal level by giving it to people who are not trained and do not understand the requirements that the Constitution and our laws impose on them.
Mr. Hitz, I know you've made some comments in your testimony, but I would appreciate your comments as well on this.
Thank you, Congressman Condit. I just wanted to say and interject as far as what Judge Webster was saying about the needs of the FBI for help in the information technology, information retrieval and storage area. We wrote, over a period of 8 years, almost every management review, every audit we did of the Directorate of Operations records contained as a final recommendation. Would you please direct it to the Director of Central Intelligence, Bill Webster, among others, could we secure money for the Directorate of Operations to modernize and improve its record system? Because over a period of time, just as appears to have happened in the Bureau, and improve its record system, because over a period of time, just as appears to have happened in the Bureau, monies were tight and monies were obviously going to be used for operational purposes as opposed to meat and potatoes infrastructural purposes if that choice had to be made. So I think there have been strides that have been made in CIA as a consequence of the attentions of this committee and the pounding that we gave them from the Inspector General's side, but it is an issue. On the issue of civil liberties, just if you'll permit me an anecdote, yearly there's a seminar in Princeton, a Medina seminar, gathering state and federal judges for a couple of days to be lectured by or discuss with some of the faculty, fine arts and everything else. At the end of the day, at the end of the session, I had the privilege of addressing them on the subject of terrorism and talked a little bit about civil liberties. And up a hand came from the back of the room, and a senior judge from Atlanta, whose name I never got, said, you know, I'm interested in what you say about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I and 4 or 5 of my fellow judges of this experience contacted the Justice Department very shortly after September 11 to say that we'd had an awful lot of experience granting federal warrants in this area. We were willing to get on a plane, go anywhere to help meet any crunch that the government may have had to deal with the demands of law enforcement to move these cases along. And I, like Judge Webster, would like to see a lot of the response to terrorism remain in the judiciary, remain in the Article III system rather than being handled on an ad hoc basis. Because I think it can be done.
Intelligence requires that the government get information. And information requires that you have to have surveillance on people. And some of those people may not be criminals. And so you've got a tremendous challenge here, it seems to me, to facilitate information gathering from suspicious people who may not have committed a crime.
Thank you, sir.
And trying to insulate legitimate personal and political activity from intrusive activity. And the solution to it lies in a person like Judge Webster. When he was head of the FBI, He was extremely sensitive to civil rights and the rule of law, and that has to come from the top. You get a lot of hard chargers in the bureaucracy who may not have that sensitivity. You have to have that sensitivity at the top, and I think that's required. You have to do it in the courts. Obviously, that's the bulwark of our liberties in the courts. But I would say your protection here, and I really appreciate your question, because I think it's very easy to overlook these matters of privacy and civil rights. It has to come from the top of the agency, has to be protected by the courts. The United States Congress, the intelligence committees have to be sensitive to the manner in which intelligence activities are carried out, and they have to zero in on civil rights and liberties.
General, did you?
I would just add one point on the protection of rights. The committees that did the investigation in the 1970s did a great service in implementing the system they have in the National Security Agency now, and ensuring that rights are not violated. So we look back and say nothing was achieved by any of these committees. It just occurred to me that this one was very important, and you're not getting any credit for it, and I think the Congress should get credit for that. And as a director of the agency, I felt better for having this. I felt that I could be certain that my bureaucracy was not going to run away and violate these kind of rights. And it was a thoughtfully done process that created that system in the 1970s.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your answers, and thank you for your service to the country.